we're likely to have a very full room tonight, so we'll give everyone a few more minutes to come in. Good. All right. Good evening, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Um, Good or bad news? The good news is because the room is absolutely packed, it's going to be nice and warm in here. The bad news is that when you leave this room and you go outside, it's going to be absolutely freezing. So, good and bad news. Um, the good news is that this is pretty much the worst of the weather. The semester, it gets better, it gets lighter, it gets warmer, it gets a little less wet. But the good news is that, yes, the weather doesn't really get worse from here. It largely gets better. So, this is International Commercial Law. My name is Douglas Arner. And essentially what I want to do tonight is talk a bit about the course, what we're going to be doing, and some of the materials that we're going to be using. So what I want to pick up with is first set of slides, which you'll find on the QM Plus page. And really, the starting point in a course like this, international commercial law, is really a question about what is it about? And in some ways, this is, if you think about it, we're at the Center for Commercial Law Studies. It's about commercial law. And if you think about the Center for Commercial Law Studies, we take a pretty broad view about what commercial law is. Almost anything related to commerce, business, finance, almost anything can be part of commercial law. But one couldn't teach a course like that. This course has to have something that is a bit more limited. And if you think about it, what is the focus? What is commerce? And I think this is one of those words that when you think about it, the more you think about it, the less you really understand what is commerce. Commerce is business, yeah, but it's something not quite the same. It's more or less wholesale trade, buying and selling of stuff. Is it the same as business? Well, business in many ways is probably broader than commerce. If we were talking about international business law, and many of you will be doing an LLM in international business law, if we were talking about international business law, that's a bit broader than commerce. Trade. Trade, and this is an important one because often when we think about international trade law, this is really public international law. This is relations between countries. And when we're thinking about commercial law, international commercial law, we're not really thinking about relations between countries. We're largely thinking about private commerce and the legal frameworks that impact that. Finance. Well, yes, there is an aspect of finance in commerce, but there's a difference between, if you think about financing generally of a business versus specific financing of commercial transactions. And we'll be looking at certain aspects of finance, but largely as they relate to specific sorts of commercial transactions. And this international, some people would call it transnational, international. International seems to suggest that it's state to state. And that's an odd one because, of course, there is an aspect of states involved setting the rules, but at the same time, we're really thinking about private transactions. So therefore, is it something that is not quite what we think of as traditional international law, but something more like transnational law? Many courses like this would be called transnational commercial law. This one happens to be called international commercial law. But the key thing is that means that we're going to see this constantly throughout the course, is that some element of the transaction, of the parties, of the legal framework being used, some aspect has to be international. In other words, if we're talking purely about a transaction of two parties within the borders of a single jurisdiction, that's not what we're talking about. We're really looking for transactions that take place from parties that are in different places, goods that are going from different places, various forms of legal arrangements that may cross borders. And one very important aspect is this idea of what is the sort of law that we're talking about. Is it only sort of what you would think of as pure state-made law? Is it some form of contract law? Are there aspects of regulation? Are there rules, practices, usages? And in the context of international commerce and using law to facilitate international commerce, we're going to see all of these different forms. In other words, we're not going to take a narrow approach where we're only looking at formal international legal instruments. Because when we think about arrangements to support cross-border commerce, what we're going to see is that they're much wider than just formal international law approaches. So, if one thinks about international commercial law, international economic law, international trade law, international business law, international financial monetary law, you can take courses in each of these here. And part of the objective is to make sure that we're not teaching exactly the same thing in every course. So what differentiates this from the others? And if we're thinking about international economic law or international trade law, these two often get used interchangeably. These are basically things like trade or regional economic arrangements, WTO, bilateral arrangements, etc. And so if what you're interested in is that, we're not going to be covering that in any great extent. It's very much covered by other courses. If we're thinking about international financial or monetary law, often international financial or monetary law courses tend to be taught from the perspective of the financial institution, the financial industry. And what we're going to be focusing on in here is only on finance as it relates to facilitating specific commercial transactions. But this is actually really important, because if you think about an international commercial transaction, in other words, someone is buying an airplane from one jurisdiction in another jurisdiction. That's a commercial transaction. You are buying and selling an aircraft. Well, very frequently, aircraft are expensive. Now, there are two aspects of this. The first is that at the heart of any commercial transaction is money. In other words, you're buying and selling. You're getting paid. And so money payment is embedded in commerce. And so we're going to spend a lot of time talking about payment, but we're not going to be talking about payment systems, how you design payment systems. We're going to be talking about systems that you actually use to make and receive payments. It's a particularly interesting time for cross-border payments, related technologies and systems. But also we're going to see that almost every commercial transaction has some element of finance. Finance basically adds time. In other words, that aircraft, if we're at an airport, you give me a suitcase full of cash or a memory stick loaded in Bitcoin, and I take the keys to the airplane, there's no time. That's an instantaneous transaction. There's the thing that we're buying and selling, the airplane, and there's also the payment. There are two things, but they're happening at the same time. Now, the moment you add in time, in other words, I pay you for the airplane later, that's finance. And anything that we can think of where we are adding time into the payment element of the transaction is finance. It's also the case that we spend a lot of effort trying to figure out ways to get the things that we are buying and selling to pay for themselves. In other words, we may not necessarily have a few $100 million on hand to pay for the aircraft. Is there some way that we can use the thing, the aircraft itself, to finance the transaction, to enable it to pay back over time? So, in this class, when we're thinking about finance, we're going to be thinking about finance in relation to the time element in transactions. Not from the standpoint of the financial system works this way or we regulate banks that way. That's not what we're focusing on here. International business law. International business law is really a little bit broader. You can throw almost anything into international business law. International commercial law is a bit narrower. We're really talking about sales on a cross-border basis of different sorts of things, usually on some type of ongoing basis. And so that narrows down a bit what we're doing. But if you think about what we're going to look at in the context of the course, and I should say two of us will be leading the course. Myself My name is Douglas Arner. I'm the Sir Roy Good Chair here at the Center for Commercial Law Studies, and also Peter Cameron. Peter is the professor of energy law, and more or less I'll be leading most of the first half of the course. Peter will be leading most of the second half of the course. And essentially, this week and next week, we're going to be talking about international commerce, international commercial law. We're going to be talking about making international commercial law. As I said, there are a variety of different organizations, a variety of different processes, generally where commercial participants try to build systems to make commerce easier. And that's really important. We're going to see what some of the challenges are in cross-border commerce and why legal mechanisms are so important in dealing with those. We'll focus first on sale of goods. If one is thinking about buying and selling things on a cross-border basis, clearly one of your key focuses is from the standpoint of sale of goods. We're going to, really throughout the course, look at issues around technology and digitalization. And this is something that, as we think about some of those core challenges in cross-border commerce, we'll see a variety of solutions. Some are legal, but also we see a lot of technological solutions. And we see an interaction between legal and technological solutions picking up increasingly. And so this topic of technology and digitalization is one that we're going to have really continually throughout the course. Money and payment. I already picked this up. If one has a commercial transaction, there has to be something that is being purchased and sold, and that means that somebody is getting paid. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time on money and payment because both money and payment in international commerce are changing extremely rapidly now. And so it makes sense to spend a bit of time on that topic. We'll also be looking at financing, and in particular, we'll be looking at things like supply chain financing, trade financing, asset-based financing. And that actually highlights another theme that we're going to focus a lot on in this course, which is supply chains. In other words, in international commerce, there is often a sort of simplified view that you're taking, for instance, that airplane from one jurisdiction and you are selling it to another, sort of assuming that everything in the context of building that airplane has actually come from the jurisdiction where it is coming from. And the reality is that today is almost never true. In other words, a complex mechanical thing like an airplane comes with complex supply chains which go into actually making the thing. And of course, one of the best examples of this, and one we'll use throughout the course, is in the context of these things. The iPhone, thinking about the various pieces that go into something like a smartphone, how those pieces come together from a variety of different manufacturers in different jurisdictions and finally come together in a single piece. Each of those elements is international commerce. But it's interesting because when one thinks about an ongoing relationship, that's also a way of managing risks. In other words, not everything is technology and contracts. Part of the fact is, if you think about Apple and you think about Foxconn, which is the major manufacturer for most of the iPhones in the world, there's a very long, deep relationship between the two. it's not simply that Apple says, hey, we're going to buy these things today. They actually work very closely in the context of the entire design process with Foxconn and a variety of other suppliers to put together the pieces which are eventually sold. So that's another aspect that we'll be focusing on, is really this idea of supply chains. One thing that we're going to look at throughout is a variety of different types of commercial transactions. And one that we'll look at on a pretty much continuing basis throughout the course is not just things like manufactured goods, but part of getting to that manufactured good is a range of particularly energy and natural resources products. In other words, you start out with some sort of silicon that eventually becomes a screen, but also some sort of silicon that eventually becomes a series of semiconductors and chips that are at the heart of the project. And so when we are thinking about something, we also have to think about these sorts of, if you will, energy and natural resources projects. And in some cases, we have very specific arrangements which have developed in individual industries, often over long periods of time, for commerce in that area. One example that we'll look at is grain, agricultural products. There's some very specific arrangements. Similarly, when we look at things like gold, gold has very specific transactional arrangements which have evolved over time. And so we'll spend some time throughout looking at these different contexts. Transport and insurance. Transport and insurance we probably won't look at very much. It may come up a bit. We will be looking at transport, and often there's a focus just on shipping, carriage of goods by sea, but we're really going to be looking as well at some other forms, particularly the one that comes up most often is air transport. In other words, if we think about today, air transport and shipping of components via air freight is actually one of our most important aspects of international commerce. Shipping does certain functions, rail, road does certain functions, air does certain functions. And one thing that we're going to see is the legal arrangements that facilitate cross-border air cargo are quite different than what we see in cross-border sea cargo. And that's, from the standpoint of this course, where we're trying to look at these different arrangements, interesting. Agency, distribution, and structure. I mentioned the supply chain idea. The supply chain idea is structures where you have different parties that come together to form a transaction, a network. In many cases, you will also have things like agency arrangements or distribution networks. Corporate structures, in fact, are one way of thinking about or organizing commerce. Clearly, we're not going to spend a lot of time on corporate structures because there are entire courses that are dedicated to that. But this idea of thinking about how one structures relations in cross-border transactions. Dispute resolution. Certainly over the past couple of years, we've had, for some reason, an increasing level in uncertainty about many cross-border trade transactions. Any idea why? Tariffs. Some people like tariffs. They constantly announce new ones. And this, oddly, throws little wrenches into our contractual arrangements that we've so carefully built for commercial transactions. And what does that cause? It causes disputes about who's going to have to pay for those extra costs. And so dispute resolution is something where obviously we have an entire LLM on dispute resolution, but we'll have a certain focus in the context of this. Future directions, one never knows in today's world what is going to happen from one day to the next. And so it's a little bit hard to point out what we're going to be looking at in terms of future directions. But at the moment, my intention is at the very end to look a little bit at space commerce. Space commerce? Something that we used to think of this as either science fiction or it was the public lawyers. The public lawyers wanted to have all of these treaties about space. But actually now you have people like Elon Musk throwing thousands and thousands of satellites up into space. People are looking at building things like data centers in space. You're looking at mining rights on the moon and a variety of other places. This is real commerce. And so when we're thinking about some of these commercial arrangements, we come into things that previously we hadn't necessarily figured would be a reality and are becoming increasingly real. So that's kind of what we're going to look at in the context of the course. Questions, comments on that? All right. So essentially the idea is we're going to be trying to look at commerce as it is and the way that different arrangements, whether those are legal, technological, structural, try to deal with those risks. And if we think about themes, some of the big themes in recent years have been around crises, around regulation, and it's something that historically the private lawyers hate regulation. There's this feeling that if you're a private law, particularly if you are a private law professor, that you're anti-regulation because regulation somehow infringes on the beauty of private law. Well, it does. Regulation infringes on everything today. And as a result, it's hard to talk about many of these issues without moving into regulatory issues. We will try to do that because often there are specific courses on those regulatory issues. And as I said, increasingly, because they are impossible to avoid. Technology, and really one of the big ones that we're going to be focusing on throughout, is in the context of multipolarity. What do I mean by this? I mean, we are seeing, if you will, a diversification in terms of economic structures. So increasingly the world, you have 2 or 3 major economic powers, which tend to also be major trading powers. Now, we can think of historically many aspects of international commercial law may have been, over the past 150, 200 years, led by Western powers. But what do you get when you have non-Western powers doing commercial transactions with one another? Do people still use legal arrangements? Yeah, actually they do. It's handy. And so even if we see China as the world's largest trading power, we can see in Chinese cross-border commerce a variety of legal arrangements, a variety of technological approaches that often derive from some of these international efforts that we're going to talk about. There's actually an open question right now about whether, as the economy moves forward, we may see China and some of the other emerging economic powers beginning to drive some of these processes going forward, particularly as powers like the US pull back from some of these international processes. And so this is going to be a theme that we're going to pick up quite a lot. And one thing that I'll do a fair amount of is news stories. In other words, we'll look at real stories that illustrate some of the themes that we're trying to address, but also highlight the ways in which commercial parties are trying to address some of the challenges and risks in transactions. And I'm going to do, let me pick up a couple of these. This one's interesting. We'll use a few websites pretty frequently. This Caixin Global is a very useful news source, particularly on Chinese international business. And so this is one that we'll pick up on. China's energy storage firms log record overseas orders amid global grid shifts. So essentially what this is a story about producers of energy storage devices. Think batteries. China is, of course, leading producer. Now this is interesting. US and Australia were the top buyers. Demand from the Middle East and South America also picked up, with combined shipments to Saudi Arabia, Chile, and UAE taking about 20. India, Japan, the UK, and Poland made up another piece. And I think this provides a really nice illustration of this idea of changing patterns of commerce. In other words, if one is thinking about a Saudi buyer and a Chinese seller, what sorts of mechanisms are you going to see from the standpoint of structuring that transaction? And this is, I think, a useful example. We'll pick up a few more. This one, not really surprising. Geely sets sights on top 5 spots in global auto rankings. Now, as we see the Chinese automakers increasingly selling internationally and globally, there are an increasing number of markets where the Chinese auto companies are the largest sellers. What sorts of mechanisms do we see from the standpoint of clearly buying and selling the goods, distribution arrangements, payment, financing, contracting, shipping, all of these things that are at the core of the commercial transactions we're looking at, but we are looking at them from the standpoint of, if you will, multiple perspectives in the context of parties to commercial transactions. This is one that we'll pick up on quite a lot throughout the course. And that is the impact of technology on transactions. And just like everything else, we're seeing an increasing uptake of AI in the context of commercial transactions. This is an article about essentially AI integration into manufacturing. Related to this, AI management of supply chains, AI management of payments, AI management of contracting, of shipping. All of these pieces we're seeing increasing uses of technology as well as automation in the context of transaction structures. So one thing that we'll be doing quite a lot is picking up news stories throughout the course as they illustrate some of these trends. Next week we'll be focusing a lot on sources. But if we're thinking about sources, some aspects, there are international legal sources. There are a surprising number of formal treaties in place which are used for structuring of private commercial transactions. We'll see contractual arrangements. We'll see in particular things like standard contracts. In other words, organizations like the International Chamber of Commerce, the ICC, which develop standardized contracts which are frequently used to structure transactions. We'll see a variety of forms of trade usage, an interesting jurisprudential argument about whether certain forms of trade usage or trade terms actually make up a form of law in themselves. Sometimes national law. Very frequently we'll see particularly English law of sales of goods used on a cross-border basis, often by parties which have absolutely nothing to do with England, but are choosing that legal system because of its familiarity and predictability. Private rulemaking and self-regulation, we'll see a number of examples of essentially club organizations where groups of private sector participants develop their own frameworks in order to make transactions work better. In some cases, regulation, and there will often be this sort of idea. There's this ideal in the context of a certain aspect of academia in international commercial law that private sector participants can organically create their own legal systems which can work without the need for any state application. And this often comes under the term of lex mercantoria, the idea that merchants come up with arrangements to govern their own transactions. And we'll investigate throughout the course whether there are examples where we actually see this, or if this is just one of those areas that is handy for getting law review articles published. It's an interesting question, actually. Course outcomes. At the end of the course, the objective is that you'll have an understanding of the role of law in international commercial transactions, an understanding of the major sources of international commercial law, be able to analyze the role of technology in international commercial law, global responses, critically discuss contemporary business trends, and understand the role of law in transactions and apply that. We'll come to how we get that in just a minute, but materials. Basically, you'll find on the QM Plus page a bunch of different options. I've recommended two, and I'll sort of circulate these around. The first, this is a book called Transnational Commercial Law by Roy Good and some others, and Roy actually decided to use transnational instead of international. This one is very large, detailed, and quite tedious to read, but it's available easily as an ebook. And for those of you who want that sort of reference, this is an easy tool. I'll pass this one around. The other, which you can find as an ebook, but it's not quite as easy as that one. This one is available easily and relatively inexpensively from bookstores. And for those of you who want a physical book, this is a nice choice. It's a little bit smaller and less heavy than that one. And from the standpoint of a physical book, it's a nice one. And what I will give you in the context of materials, each week, essentially one from the Twig Fleischer book, the little blue one, and also a chapter from the Good book. They're interchangeable. You don't necessarily have to read both of them. Read one or the other. They're pretty much interchangeable. Take a look and see which one you like better. Go with that option. And generally speaking, for most weeks, I'll also give you something in terms of distributed materials which will generally be something about technological developments. In other words, how we're seeing technology absorbed into commercial transactions, international commercial legal arrangements. Websites, Bloomberg. I use a lot of Bloomberg, but I have to say Bloomberg is hideously expensive, so I don't expect any of you to actually get it. But it has very good stories, and so I will use those. The FT. QM has a free subscription to the FT. This, if you haven't discovered it, is very handy. And the FT also has a lot of useful stories from the context of the subjects that we're going to look at. I'll pick up one in just a minute. Caixin, I already showed you, The Economist, and the Wall Street Journal. There are a few organizations that we'll look at frequently. The ICC, International Chamber of Commerce. We'll see them many weeks throughout the course. UNCITRAL, the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. We'll see a lot of UNCITRAL throughout the course. UNIDROIT, the International Institute for the Unification of Private Law. We'll see a lot of them. And a little bit less, and we'll come at them periodically, the International Organization for Standards, ISO. These sorts of standards are increasingly important in many aspects of international commerce. So, let me pick up one FT story really quick. This is an interesting one. Memory stocks soar as investors hunt for new AI winners. High-tech memory and computer storage stocks are soaring due to insatiable demand for their chips and a shortage of supply as investors hunt for the next winners in the booming AI sector. Now, if you think about this from the standpoint of commerce, memory and processing, these are almost everywhere today. And as a result, when we have, for instance, of AI processing demand driving up prices of memory chips and processing chips, the end result is those costs hit almost everything. And that, in turn, impacts on large aspects of commerce that we don't necessarily think about. And so this is one of those trends that's interesting because something, AI, drives up demand, which drives up prices, which cause shortages, which impact all sorts of other transactions. Data storage makers have long been overlooked as an unglamorous and less innovative corner of the IT hardware market, but their stocks have rocketed in price in recent months in the face of an AI infrastructure build-out forecast to exceed $500 billion this year. SanDisk shares have nearly doubled since the start of January and are up almost 1,000% since August last year. And this, the supply squeeze and high demand have sent the price of chips alongside the stocks that make them soaring. And this is something that we will see feeding through to just about everything we look at. Those supply chain pieces, the costs, the financing, and eventually disputes too. All right. Pick up. Where did it go? So, last piece is really from the standpoint of assessment. And there are a few old exams from other versions, and I'll upload the exam from last year, even though that's not a perfect fit either. the exam for this course is the sort of FAO structure, a sort of CCLS approach, which is basically a 24-hour period to do a normal exam online. And the typical structure is that you'll have 5 questions and have to answer 3. And if we think about what those questions are going to cover, they're not going to be problem-based questions. They're going to be questions about the core subjects we're going to look at. Certainly something will have to do with technology. Certainly something will have to do with something that will happen from a geopolitical standpoint that will impact commerce sometime this semester. I have no clue what that will be, but I'm quite certain that there will be something interesting. From the standpoint of lex mercantoria. Lex mercantoria, this idea, it just keeps coming up in international commercial law. It's one of those core ideas, and so there's always a question from the standpoint of lex mercantoria. Typically from the standpoint of sources and ways of setting international commercial law, and that gives you, if you will, we'll look at the end to give you a clear picture of exactly what the optional questions will cover, but I think that gives you an idea at the beginning what the coverage is likely to be like. All right. Questions or comments on the assessment or on the course? Yeah. Yeah, basically it's online wherever you are, so you have the option of using whatever you want. Which there are many of us who have some questions about this assessment mechanism, but it's pretty embedded at this place, and so we haven't changed it yet. Others, yeah. I think it's typically around 5,000 max. So you typically have a max word limit. And then how you use that is up to you. Others? Yeah. Yeah, so we always count footnotes as part of the word count. Because for anyone who's ever read an American Law Review article, you'll know that we can write thousands of words in a footnote. And so, yeah, the footnotes count. But a bibliography doesn't count. So, for instance, if you use your sources at the end, that list doesn't count, but footnotes do. Others? Yeah. So, from my standpoint, in terms of the question was, what sort of referencing system do you have to use? I'm quite flexible. There are a variety of systems. You all come from a variety of different jurisdictions and backgrounds. I'm comfortable with most citation systems as long as it's consistent. Yes.
As a new course is international commercial law, not transnational law. And you more or less explain the difference between both of them, that if I understand well, in commercial law it involves commerce between states, and in transnational law it includes commerce between states, but also the private section of it. We want to see the second one.
So, if you think about international trade law, international economic law, these are about state-to-state relations. International commercial law or transnational commercial law are mainly about private transactions and how international arrangements can support those transactions. The reality is, between, Twig Fleischer he's called his book International Commercial Law. Good has called his Transnational Commercial Law. The coverage of the two books is the same. So it's really, some people think that the international terminology should refer to essentially state relations. Others aren't quite so bothered by it. So No, in this course, we'll be looking at the various arrangements which are used to govern transactions. Yeah, exactly. Others? This is good. Yeah.
Is bibliography required?
No, 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 it's not. It's not. You could easily write it without, but many do. So, yeah. Others? Yeah. You know, not really. Um, you'll have, if you will, the sort of examples of previous papers, which will kind of give you an idea of what those are, but not really. And we'll go in the last tutorial, we'll kind of look at structuring, and also in the last class, we'll definitely talk about strategies for structuring, but there's no single right way to do these. Yeah, but yeah, I'm happy to look at it. But once again, past papers are not necessarily predictive of the content on future ones. Yeah, there was a hand over here. Yeah.
Is it going to be in like practical examples type of questions
It will be
or just theory?
it will be not necessarily theory, but it won't necessarily be problem questions. In other words, we won't have, here's a complex problem, how would you deal with it? Instead, we will have you talk about the various mechanisms that are available. So it's not necessarily theoretical, but it's not a problem-based question either. Yeah. And there was over here. Yes? It will be sometime in May. I don't think they've set the exam schedule yet. They usually set that sometime in the middle of the semester. But yeah, it'll be May-ish. Yeah. Others?
I just wanted to clarify again on the number of questions. I know you had said past questions wouldn't determine, but I'm saying like two out of five in the previous ones.
Yeah, so I think the general approach today is 3 out of 5. So yeah, that seems to be what the exam, the assessment structuring people are asking for, is 3 out of 5. Others? Okay. Now, in terms of structuring of the class, generally we'll have about a 15-minute break in the middle, maybe a short second break. Why? Research suggests that maximum learning takes place in 50-minute blocks, so we'll probably try to focus on that, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily work. I generally, and we certainly will tonight, in the context of the first class, wrap up a bit early. One, because for those of you who have just joined from January, these classes, the 3-hour sessions, are a bit of a marathon. For those of you who joined in September, you're well used to this by now. But there is, of course, a large new group, particularly in the international business, international commercial law, LLMs, that has just joined. So that's the structure we'll normally take. I actually want to switch directions at this stage and actually find out who you are. In other words, just want to get a quick introduction, where you're from, why you're taking this course. And if you've decided you're not going to take the course, that's perfectly fine as well. But from my standpoint, I find that having an idea of who is in the classroom makes a real difference from my standpoint. So let's start at the corner over here, and then we'll go across.
Good evening.
Switzerland, doing an international maritime law LLM. And I took this class because I think it's well complete my academic background.
Yeah. Often you'll find that commerce goes with the maritime aspect. It doesn't have to, but it often does. So a good fit.
Hi, my name is Darsh. I'm an advocate from India. I'm doing a master's in general law here at CCLS. And my reason to pick this course was because back home it's high in demand, as well as internationally.
Yes, this is something that I always hear, and it's true. And certainly demand is going up. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Mikola. People call me Mik. I'm from Ukraine. Just like Ben here, I'm doing maritime law. I just thought it's quite interesting, and it goes hand in hand with maritime law.
Very good.
Hi, my name is Ritu. I'm a lawyer from India. My specialization is commercial and corporate law, and I took up this course because it aligns with my career goals to become a corporate lawyer.
Excellent. Oh, very good.
Hi, my name is Sergio. I'm a lawyer from Colombia. I'm also doing the commercial and corporate law LLM. And apart from it being compulsory, I don't know, I've always had like an interest in the commercial side of things ever since I did my undergrad, so I thought it would be a great class.
Excellent. Good. Welcome.
I am Pramodini. I'm an advocate from India. I chose this course because I was practicing litigation back home and I want to make the switch to corporate, so I think this course will be good.
Good.
Good evening, I'm Arnab, and I took this because it seems interesting and my senior suggested this to me.
Always a good reason. Excellent.
Oh, I'm Abdul. I'm from India. I'm in corporate and commercial law. I think this is an interesting subject, and also I'm interested in litigation as well. So I think somehow it's going to help me in the future as well.
Yeah, no, it's a rich source of litigation. So,
Yes.
yeah.
So it's
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm from Colombia. I'm doing the international business law in UNAM. And I chose this course because I was working for an international company and I want to be involved more in the international transactions.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Vayan from Greece. I've been working as a lawyer in Greece for 2.5 years and on maritime law, and I wanted to explore more of the commercial aspect of it. So I found it really interesting.
I'm Diana. I'm from Ukraine. I'm a Ukrainian lawyer. I've worked in a commercial court for 8 years since I just want to transfer my knowledge to the UK.
Yeah.
So I think it's helpful.
Excellent. Very good.
Hi, I'm Aida. I'm from India. I'm doing my commercial and corporate law. I chose this because I work for a corporate company and I wanted to specialize in it. So I chose this course.
Good.
Professor Asad from Uzbekistan, and I'm going to work in international trade law sphere. That's why it's interesting to me. And my friends from my country suggested this course, especially you, because they got some modules from you, and that's why I'm taking this.
Very good. Thank you for that.
I'm Nicole. I'm from Poland. And I'm doing the LLM with the SQE. And I chose to do this course because I did commercial law in my undergrad. So I think it's good.
Yeah, complimentary. Yes.
My name is Hushli. I'm from Bhutan.
Yeah.
I was previously working at the commercial law firm, and I'm looking to specialize in commercial.
Very good.
My name is Fahd Ahmed. I'm from Pakistan. I just wanted to know more about commercial law because it's a growing field in Pakistan.
Yeah, definitely.
Hi, my name is Talha and I'm from Pakistan. I'm doing LLM in commercial and corporate law, and I want to explore this field. There are many reasons. One of them is that I have listened that corporate lawyers earn a lot. So
Very good.
that's the reason. Secondly, I want to explore how these businesses are governed by legal rules and regulations. That's
Good. Oh, welcome.
I'm Ilka from Angola.
Nice.
I picked this module because it was compulsory for my course. But I picked commercial and corporate law because because of the different elements. And we just looked at the overview, and it has some technology, financing, energy, and I essentially want to work in energy law, oil and gas, so
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yes, we'll cover some, particularly Peter's half.
My name is Lord I'm from Vietnam, and my major is international business law, and I chose this module because international commercial law is a rising field in Vietnam, and there are multiple multinational companies that requires them to look into it.
Yeah, no, this is particularly from the standpoint of Vietnam. This is an area where lots is going on.
Hi, my name is Michael, or like Mikhail in my home language. I'm from Russia. So, and actually, I'm really interested in dispute arising from commercial transactions. So, and to be honest, I'm from commercial and corporate law department, but also I have some courses of some models from alternative dispute resolution. So, and I think that particularly this model may give me more understanding about factors which influences the commercial transactions and disputes arising out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of the feeder into the disputes. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Apritam. I'm doing my master's in corporate and commercial law. And the reason why I chose this module is because I was interested in international trade and the international policy aspect. So that's why I chose international.
Yeah, probably a little bit less policy in this one, but from a slightly different angle. So, yeah.
I'm Meika, I'm from Turkey. I took this subject because it's a fundamental, I think, from my master's program. That's why I chose it.
Very good.
Hello, my name is Ana. I am from Panama. And, well, I chose this course because, first, the module description convinced me that this was one of the bases for my LLM, which is commercial and corporate law. And even, well, here it says that it's focusing on transactions in all forms and multiple entities. So, and also mention a lot of contracts that also interchange between one another, and it was really broad. So I wanted to know a little bit of everything that you mentioned there, and who it was you. So that's what.
Yeah, makes sense, and it is. We will cover a lot of ground. So, yeah, good.
Yeah, my name is Katarina. I'm from Germany, and I specialize in international corporate law. And yeah, why I took this course is I've been working for 2 years in an Airbus legal team, an international operating company, and I was like kind of thrown into it back in the day. So I felt like it was a good opportunity to maybe build a solid foundation with quality background.
Yeah, no, this is, and something in many cases will have a bit of that in-house perspective. In other words, some approaches to this course are sort of scholarly, where they look at the international processes. Some are really from the dispute resolution side. But in many ways, the heart of this course is really thinking of it from the standpoint of a business. And often, that's exactly this sort of in-house context, and that will often be how we're thinking about things. Yeah.
I'm originally from Cambridge, and I'm currently a trainee lawyer. I did my undergrad in business. I've always been passionate about law, so I thought this would be a great way to bridge the two together.
Yeah. Hopefully.
My name is Soumya. I'm an advocate. I have 2 years of experience in India. I'm really interested in global affairs, and I want to understand the legal aspect of how commerce affects the globe, the world. And
Yeah, no, we'll try to, in many ways, we'll be focusing on how commerce tries to build standards for itself. And so exactly from that standpoint. Yeah.
I'm Louise. I'm from Brazil. I work with M&A, and I test this model to deepen my understanding of commercial transactions, international transactions.
Yeah, excellent. Very good.
I'm Yasmin. I'm from London. I graduated last year in law, and I want to specialize in commercial law. I did study it for my third year, but now I want to specialize and study privacy.
Yeah, very good.
Hi, I'm Maya. I'm from Pakistan, and the reason why I'm taking this course is that I was practicing commercial law on a domestic level, so now I want to explore it on an international level.
Yeah, this is one aspect of that sort of increasing multipolarity of transactions is the opportunities in this field are growing everywhere. It's good.
Hi, my name is Rizal. I'm from London, and I
no, that is, as I said, when we think about commerce, that's exactly what we're talking about. So very good.
My name's Cameron. I did my master's in law and finance. I picked this course
Nice.
because it looks like it's really interesting.
It's a good reason.
My name is Avinash. I'm a practicing attorney from India, and I'm doing my master's in corporate and commercial law. The reason I chose this that at home I have some experience in commercial cases. So right now I'm just increasing my portfolio, and just looking for more opportunities.
It's good.
Hello everyone, my name is Benita. I'm a lawyer from Nigeria. So I've been in active litigation for a good number of years in Nigeria, and few years to now, I thought to move in-house and practice as a solicitor. So now I'm in Queen Mary doing commercial and corporate law. I only know that, commerce is business, business is commerce, so it's only crucial that I take this move.
That's good. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Momina and I'm from Pakistan. I'm currently doing the commercial and corporate law online. And the reason I took this course was I've had some experience in commercial arbitration and dispute resolution. So I'd love to understand like the transactional side of it. So that's
Yeah, no, that's very good. Excellent.
My name is Eleanor. I'm from Saudi Arabia, and I chose this module to just have a fuller understanding of commercial law and learn more about it.
Good for that.
Hi, I'm Hazel. I'm from Vietnam. So I chose this course because I want to know more, but from the aspect of the common law system, because it's not what we have in ours.
It'll be a little bit less sort of common law and civil law because many of the mechanisms are, but that argument about how you reflect differences in legal systems is something that comes up very frequently.
Hi, my name is Daphne. I'm from Turkey. I'm interested in maritime law because there's a harbor developing in my hometown, which is expected to be the biggest one in my region. And I know about how international commerce is very important and the center of it. Alongside my legal practice, also I'm managing my family business, which is agriculture, and we are producing and exporting worldwide our fruits. And because I'm involved in every step, I wanted to learn the structure and behind this of it, and I wanted to improve myself.
Excellent. Yeah, very good.
Hi, my name is Shreya. I'm from India. So I have chosen international commercial law because I feel it's directly aligned to my professional goals, and I genuinely like this subject.
My name is Asa. My only background on commercial law is from the GDL, Sovereign Duty Held Contract Law, and this financial external markets.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely be expanding on that. So,
My name is Emanuela. I'm Italian. I'm an Italian lawyer, and I am in the Maritime LLM. So I believe this course is crucial for us in order to have a commercial perspective of everything.
yeah, no, the two are very complementary. Agreed.
My name is Darwish. I'm from Moldova. I'm doing the international business law. During my undergrad, my main interest was commercial law, especially from international perspectives, so national relationships, deeper interest.
Excellent. Yeah, good.
My name is Urba. I worked as a lawyer in Turkey for 2 years, and now I'm doing LLM in maritime law. I chose this module because it's closely related to maritime law.
Definitely.
My name is Yusuf. I'm Jordan.
Yeah, nice.
I'm doing my LLM in commercial and corporate law, and I think knowing the international aspect of commercial law is very important.
Yeah, no, increasing.
Hi, I'm Ayush. I'm from India. I was a practicing advocate as well as a litigator in commercial disputes in India. Specifically, right now, I chose this module because right now India is making a lot of free trade deals with EU as well as with UK.
yeah.
So that is the biggest point that I chose this module.
Yeah, no, from the standpoint of India, the sort of commercial transactions on a cross-border basis are increasing very, very rapidly. So, yeah.
My name is Prithviraj and my major is commercial and corporate law.
majorly in commercial law. That's how I grew my interest in commercial law, which is why I chose this.
And my name is Sarvesh Raj Verma from India. I've been a corporate lawyer for the past 2 years. And the reason I chose this module is because it basically connects legal theory to real world decision making.
That's the hope. So,
Hi, my name is Zeynep Tande. I'm also born in Tande. I am from Turkey, and I worked as a corporate lawyer in Turkey, and I'm studying commercial and corporate law LLM. And I chose this program to gain deeper knowledge of this area.
very good.
My name is Lai. I'm also from Turkey, and I chose this model because I think it's interesting. Thank you.
Excellent reason.
Hi, I'm Efe. I'm from Turkey. I took this class because like it covers the most general aspects of commerce. That's why.
Handy and useful. Very good. Yeah. 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 Yeah, no, we'll pick up definitely some related points. Yeah, no, good enough. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Malla. I'm from India, and I am into warehousing and logistics. So
Ah.
I need a brief understanding of trade law, and as a lot of things are going on with India and UK regarding the trade tariffs, so I need a brief understanding of it.
Yeah, no, we'll be definitely hitting on some of the logistics aspects, and particularly relating to some of the financing aspects. Yeah.
My name is Anushka. I'm from India, and I took this module because I'm interested in the legal side of international trade.
Hi, my name is Sakura, and I'm from India. And I took this module because I have done description as well as best, and it will help me to get the more understanding of the international commercial law.
It's the objective, so hopefully.
Hi, my name is Vishaki. I'm from Kenya. I'm an advocate of India. I've been doing ADR, and I'm just looking for a new change in commercial corporate law.
Okay.
My name is Inès France, and I'm doing a postgraduate study. And I chose this class because I'm really interested in transnational cross-border relationship.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely think about this from a variety of angles, so very good.
Hi, my name is Seema. I'm from India. I'm majoring in corporate and commercial law. And I think one of the reasons of picking this module was, again, it's being one of the core subjects of the program, and also just with the intention of learning.
Yeah, very good.
Hi, I'm Vivian. So I'm doing my master's in international business. So I think this course will learn more about corporate in an international setting.
I'm Seema, and I'm from India. And I this course because I was exploring more about the history of international trade. Hi, my name is Mama. I'm from South Korea. South Korea for lawyer. I'm practicing MMA, and I chose this module to develop my extensive writers and understanding of international trade.
Very good. And it's a core thing from South Korea's standpoint, and we'll certainly pick up a few examples throughout the course.
I chose this course because my background is purely commercial law, and I have worked on civil rights contracts. So I wanted to study how these legal basis of how we are building contracts actually how they are documented.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Linda from India. I'm an advocate back home, and I chose this module because it's really in demand back home as well. And I have worked in M&A and corporate commercial, so I just wanted to see how I can do this internationally as well.
Yeah,
And
sounds
open
good.
my doors.
Yeah, no, this will definitely be different from the M&A context. So.
Yeah, because I've worked with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, I am Aksa. I'm from Turkey. I'm doing corporate and commercial law.
And I chose this course because I thought it would be helpful when I go back.
commercial litigation, and I chose this module because I want to gain a better understanding of international commerce from a global context.
Yeah, yeah, perfect, exactly.
I'm Nina. I'm from Nigeria. I'm doing the commercial and corporate specialty. But I'm working in compliance and asset management, so that involves a lot of cross-border flow. So I want to kind of understand more about international commercial transactions. And I did a minor in my final year, I did commercial law, but I want to understand it from like international perspective because I want to work cross-border.
Yeah, yep, very good, thank you.
Hi, my name is Gauri. I'm from India. So I'm interested in corporate and commercial law, and I also want to understand how well law works with business as well as the commercial transactions.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent.
Hi, my name is P, and I just graduated from my undergraduate program, and I working as a maritime exploitation field. So I think that international commercial law is how to minimize commercial
Very good.
Hi, my name is Hugo. I'm from Poland. I chose this module because I had ITL in my undergrad and I quite enjoyed the context
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, it depends on how the ITL course was taught, how the relation will be. But if it was more public law, this will parallel very nicely. If it was traditional sort of domestic international trade law, then it'll be a nice parallel as well. So,
It was very sort of,
okay,
I guess, English standard.
okay, yeah. So this will be different, which is good. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Yuki, and I'm from China, and I choose this model because I want to be a commercial lawyer in the future.
We'll be using quite a lot of Chinese examples, so good.
Hi, I'm Navin from Pakistan. I've worked in corporate sector back home, and the reason I've chosen is to deepen my understanding of commercial practices.
Good.
Hi, my name is Shristi. I'm from India, and my specialization is international commercial and corporate law. The reason I opted for this course is back in India, I worked in a firm which recently dealt with international commercial law. And the reason I opted for this is I want to explore more how the whole transaction works and how to deal with international clients.
Good.
Hi, I'm Vismaya. I'm from India. I chose this module because to build a solid foundation for a career in commercial and corporate practice.
Good reason. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Narendra. I'm from India. My area of interest was always in corporate sector. So for that reason, I've chosen commercial and corporate sector.
Good. Yeah, in many ways, the design is to kind of parallel what one would have done in a business master's, but from the legal angle. So, yeah, it should work.
Hi, I'm Chinmay. I'm from India, and I'm in corporate commercial law. I chose this module as it aligns very well with my interest.
Good reason.
I am Yusuf. I'm from Sudan, and apart from doing it in my undergrad, I've worked at the International Commercial Commission before. So I've dealt with CIF and
Yeah.
contracts and felt it.
Yeah, excellent.
Hi, I'm Yali. I'm from China. The reason I want to choose this subject because I used to take a master degree about the international financial law.
Yeah.
So now maybe I want to change the subject and maybe gain some new understanding in the civil engineering.
Yeah, definitely a different direction in here. Yeah.
My name is Yusuf from Netherlands, and I just chose commercial law to work in
It's a good reason. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Asara. I'm from Sri Lanka. So I'm doing my MSc in Law and Finance. I chose this because I think it will with the combination I'm doing and the social aspect and the other finance organization.
Yeah, good. Just
Hello, my name is Onuralp. I'm with commercial corporate, and I chose this because it sounded essential for the role.
Excellent.
I chose that module because I also thought it was essential for the course and I wanted to work in that field.
Very good.
I'm Saskia.
Excellent. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Celia from France. I'm doing the general LLM. I did the Visma a few years ago, and I really like learning about international commercial law, so I wanted to do this course.
Sounds very good.
Hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm from Algeria. I chose this subject because I find it a nice addition to my other modules under PNLA, and I wanted to study more.
Yeah, very good. Welcome.
Hey, I'm Raphael. I'm from London. Having done undergrad law school with an interest in continuing both sort of deeper understanding of the international dispute space as such. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Hi, my name is Amelia, and I'm from Pakistan. And the reason I chose this course is because I wanted to understand how cross-boundary finance and sustainability solution integrate in globalized economy and also international markets.
Yeah, very good. And definitely this idea of interaction in a globalized economy is our central focus. So, yes.
Hi, I'm Ashwar from India. I'm doing commercial and corporate law. Back in India, I worked in MNC as a legal associate. So, to further improve my acumen, I'm doing this.
Very good.
Hi, I'm Anushka. I'm doing commercial law. Okay. I chose this module specifically because I used to work in a law firm and we were expanding our horizon
Ah.
to Japan, UK, and even anywhere around the world. So I wanted to delve more into these ideas. That's why.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marina. And I just chose this because I was working within my LLB for a commercial law firm, so I wanted to learn more about global perspectives.
Yeah, good. We'll take a structured approach, and so it should help. Good. Hopefully we'll keep it interesting.
Hi, I'm Pratika. I'm from India. I did my commercial law in undergrad final year. We just talked about civil influence from an undergrad perspective and how much of a big impact transparency can make. But I wanted to explore it more with the international commercial perspective.
Yeah, good.
Hi, I'm Karen. I was born and raised in Dubai. And if you know anything about Dubai, you know that, I mean, everything is international, from construction to labor.
Hmm.
And I was always very interested in how that all happened. On top of that, my dad has been running a commodity business for over 20 years now. So I grew up hearing about letters of credit and broker saving and shipping. And I think that that formed that interest in me just from that early stage. So I'm looking forward to expanding that here.
Yeah.
Thank you for getting to know some of the other lecturers sometimes.
Yeah, thanks. And what you've just outlined is exactly what we're going to be looking at. So, yeah, should fit. Good.
Hi, I'm Mahi. I'm from India, and I chose this module because I was interested in what it explore.
Good.
Hi, I'm Arif. I'm from Dubai. I'm an international business law and an English related to commercial.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vedansh and I'm also doing commercial and corporate law. So who is interested in commercial law? And to set the base for this program, I just spoke to introduction.
My name is Anand, and I'm from India. The reason for selecting the course is to leverage and apply the commercial expertise in both fintech and private campus.
Hi, I'm Shreya. I'm from Pakistan. So in Pakistan, I was mostly into litigation, mainly property disputes. But I had the pleasure of working on one international contract for a local energy company. And it was fun, so I'm excited about it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarika, and I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. And this course directly pertains to my dissertation efforts.
Ah, what's the dissertation topic?
It's regarding the actual apparent authority of e-commerce transactions and chatbots, and selecting commercial law with that in mind.
Cool. Let me just count. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. 36 countries. is pretty cool. And a wide variety, almost everybody with a little bit of background in the subject matter. And I think this kind of highlights this idea of multipolarity in transactions that we're going to be looking at. Just a couple of admin issues. Course code, if you need it for the app, is here. Please call me Douglas, not Professor, not Sir, Dr. Arner. Douglas is good. You've got my email in the materials. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Little bit of my background. I worked here, actually I did my LLM here a very long time ago. And so I took this course when I was doing the LLM for actually the reason that many of you are taking it, because it sounded like something that I should know about. After working actually here at the Center for Commercial Law Studies for a few years, moved to Hong Kong in the year 2000. And literally just moved back to the UK last summer after 25 years in Hong Kong at the University of Hong Kong, where I led our master's programs in corporate and financial law, and actually all of our master's programs, in fact. And as a result, we'll be picking up a fair amount of sort of Asian examples, because that's something I'm familiar with, but also across Africa and Middle East areas where I've worked, and Eastern Europe. One of my big focuses is in the context of technology. So we'll be focusing a lot on issues of new technologies, how they're impacting international commerce, and how from an international standpoint we're trying to address new forms of technology in transactions. And what I kind of want to do is actually leave off with this. You'll find across the semester that we come back to this a lot. And in many ways, what this is it's an attempt to understand the purpose and evolution of commercial law. In other words, commercial law exists because it tries to deal with certain problems. And those problems may be dealt with by relational arrangements, they may be dealt with via contractual arrangements, they may be dealt with via a range of technological arrangements. But at the core are these same sorts of problems. And we'll come to them over and over. Always start by thinking about what I think of as an instantaneous transaction. What do I mean by that? I mean that idea that if I sell you my book and you pay me right now, that's a simple transaction. We're done. There's not a lot of risk, there's not a lot of complexity. But the more time we add into that transaction, the more complicated and risky it becomes. In other words, think about our airplane example. If I ask you to build an airplane for me, there's a lot of time in there. And the more time, the more risk there is from both of our standpoints that something goes wrong. And so we try to figure out mechanisms to deal with the time risk. And often, when we're talking about international, we're also talking about distance. The more distance we add in, the more risk there is as well. And when you combine time and distance, that increases the risk in the transaction, and we're continually trying to figure out ways to manage those risks via relations, via contracts, via technology, etc. And often, we will also add in, as a result of, if one thinks about this sort of idea of capitalist transaction structures, often there's an aspect of specialization. In other words, the sort of idea is that companies, firms, businesses, individuals will be able to specialize in certain things. Via specialization, you are becoming better, more efficient. I don't think we had anyone in from Japan, but if you ever go to Japan, one thing that you will discover in Japan is craftsmen, craftspeople. They're not necessarily men, but they tend to have one little thing that they do, and they do it exceptionally well. Now, if you are able to combine a bunch of those things into something, that can be an interesting result. So specialization is often something that we're trying to take advantage of in transactions. In other words, Apple doesn't make the Gorilla Glass. It doesn't make the chips. It doesn't make the aluminum cases. It doesn't make the standardized charging cable. In other words, there are specialized firms that focus on each of these. But in order for that to work, for that specialization to work, we invite in complexity. Complexity may bring good results from a commercial standpoint, but it also brings risks similar to time and distance. And so we spend a lot of effort trying to balance risks of complexity and specialization with the benefits of complexity and specialization. And certainly these two pieces, in a world where we are seeing increasing geopolitical uncertainties, means that the ability in most places to have a single unique supplier for a unique piece is less and less desirable. More and more desirable to have multiple potential sources, and likewise, if you are the producer, you want to ideally have more than one client who is buying the things that you are producing. Because after all, if someone comes in and throws tariffs, or there's a war, or whatever may happen, this, if you're overexposed to a single producer or a single client, likewise brings risks. And so, often when we're thinking about legal arrangements, technological arrangements, they're about managing risks, but they're also about efficiencies, making the process easier, faster, cheaper. And from that in-house perspective, they're about reducing transaction costs. And as a result, to the extent that we can standardize systems so that we know that they work better, they are less costly, more predictable, and more effective at managing risks. So many of our international processes are about looking at transactions, figuring out how can we agree, develop a system which will make the transaction more easy, less expensive, more predictable. And that then takes us into a variety of different types of processes. different organizations, different legal arrangements, and today, likewise, increasing use of different technologies to try to achieve similar sorts of results. And an interesting aspect that often comes up is there a way to use some of these legal or technological arrangements as what we think of as a trust alternative? In other words, if you are in whatever country you're in, and you are working with a business that exports whatever it is that they make and sell, you're limited in the context of buyers. How can you expand to more buyers, more consumers, without necessarily knowing each one? Now, if we think about in the context of, for instance, the Middle Ages, your typical transaction structure would often be to have multiple relatives spread across multiple jurisdictions as a relational structure in order to deal with issues around time, distance, and risk. And that's still the case. I'm sure some of you still know very good examples where you will have those sorts of family or relational structures. But also, over the past 150, 200 years in particular, we've tried to build a series of institutional structures which can work to achieve the same thing: trust alternatives. And some of you that have looked at things like blockchain or distributed ledger technology will already be saying, okay, well, when you think about blockchain or distributed ledger technology, you're often talking about a trust alternative. Is there a way to use a technology to provide an alternative to relational systems? And so, as we look at the different pieces of transactions, we're going to be coming back in each case to these points. And it's always easiest, start with that instantaneous transaction. But even in an instantaneous transaction, there are complexities. There was something that we assumed in this instantaneous transaction. My notebook, he pays me. But what does he pay me in? Now here, we're in a single country. We can assume that probably it's going to be the dominant currency of that country. But as soon as you add a cross-border element in, that question of who pays what to the other person is no longer necessarily so simple. And this is, once again, one of those aspects that thinking about time, distance, and risks involved. Now, think about what was, anyone notice gold price today? Crossed 5,000 US dollars today. It's a new record. Everybody loves gold right now. Why? It's a handy transaction. We've been using it as a mechanism of payment or a store of value for thousands of years. But it's kind of a headache to use it on a cross-border basis. In other words, shipping the stuff, flying it around, it's high risk, it's heavy, it's expensive. How do you turn that into a payment mechanism that can be more easily used? And fascinatingly, there was actually an article today about a project among BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the sort of group, about how they are trying to build a system largely based upon gold as a mechanism to facilitate payments for commercial transactions on a cross-border basis. That is, if you will, an interesting example, trying to use some combination of technology and legal arrangement. This could easily be a treaty which embeds a system to enhance predictability, support efficiency, reduce transaction costs, form a trust alternative to allow greater predictability of transactions on a cross-border basis. So one of our key questions going throughout the course is, if we have had, and we're definitely going to see some of these mechanisms, have largely been the products of traditionally Western-led commercial systems, as we see increasing multipolarity in commerce, do we see the need for different systems? Or in fact, are the problems the same, whether it's a transaction between the US and Brazil, or it's a transaction between South Africa and Turkey? And does that then mean that the international arrangements are relevant regardless of what countries, parties are involved in the transaction? Not answering it. I'm just saying that that's a question that is going to be embedded throughout the course. All right, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover tonight. As I said, we would wrap up a bit early. Next week we probably won't wrap up a bit early, but this week I always like to wrap up a bit early, not least to let those of you who've decided that you're not going to do this, to have the chance to escape and not ruin your entire evening. But with that, hopefully, I'll see all of you back next week. Have a good night. Hey, there's the code. Send me an email and then I'll... Yeah. Yeah.
I had this one. It's the first edition.
It's close enough. Yeah.
It's close enough.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And I forgot to say, can I have my books back? There's one back there, and there should be the blue one around here somewhere. Hey.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If I were to buy any book, which one would you
It's a trade-off. The good book is definitely more detailed, but it's a little bit older. The Twigg-Fleischer book is newer and more readable. So it kind of depends on, do you want kind of a reference in which good is better, or do you want something that's easier to carry and read, and Twigg-Fleischer is better?
I want the most detailed one as possible.
Okay, then go with the good one. The good book.
The big heavy one.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I get it on Amazon?
You can, or there's also the ebook, but it is reasonably available and it is on Amazon.
Oh, no, I don't want it.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you on that one. Thanks.
Can I
Yeah.
see the second one? The second one you gave, can I see that?
Yeah, he's got it there.
Could I just view the book?
Yeah, please.
Because it wasn't passed around down
Yeah,
this
sorry.
section.
You guys got the large one and they got the small one. Hey.
To update my tenants.
Strange. Yeah, I don't know. So you didn't get a place to enter the code?
Mine doesn't show.
Yours didn't show up either? Okay. It's often the case that it doesn't work in the first place. But take a photo of this in case it works. That's the code. Yeah.
Because it's my first day.
So normally, yeah, the app, you would insert this code, and then that's, yeah. But it's inconsistent in how well it works.
Can I also take a picture of it after?
Also,
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hey.
Good session.
Yeah,
See you next
you're
week.
welcome. See you next week.
Good. I'm just gonna close the. Ah, thank you.
Yeah, it was back there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
I was just going to say real quick, if you want, take a quick look at the two side by side, and yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I have a question related to preparation for the second lecture. Am I right that actually we just have to revise the history issues from the first chapter, some kind of basic principles, and after that focus mostly on chapter 5 on sources, right?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a bit confused because on this lecture we covered only kind of introductional parts, so okay, thank you.
Exactly.
Like, do you have the app? That's how they're just for your.
Hey.
I may have a private question.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to the Shanghai University of Finance?
Yeah, many times.
Yeah. So I'm working on my master degree.
Ah, excellent. Yeah.
And I may thought because I'm working on the international financial.
Yeah.
Some of you articles about the
Yeah.
systematic risk.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if I have some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can ask for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I just Googled it, so I may find you have already worked in the Hong Kong University, the Shanghai University of Finance and Economics.
Yeah, so no,
some
very-
financial firm.
Yeah.
Maybe not commercial and financial.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
I like that because it's like,
They're different.
yeah, kind of like two perspectives of different writers. So
Exactly.
I don't know.
They're not expensive, is the good news. Is neither of them, and that was another thing that was nice about both of them, is this one particularly is cheap, as they are, and this one is not bad. So check the prices, and yeah, they're not, they cover the same thing, but in a different way. So that's why I say you can read either one, and you're perfectly fine. But if you read both, they're not the same.
Yeah.
So they're okay.
Okay, but these are the latest versions of each.
Yeah, so this one is kind of dated a little bit. But from the standpoint of the traditional approach to everything, it's solid. And this one, even though it covers some of the new tech issues, neither of them are really up where we'll be covering in class. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Next one is related to IP.
Yeah, it was a bit late. Said I'm gonna collect my library ID. It's like, oh yeah. I will come back in time. It was a rush.
Yeah, my friends all suggested you go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. So you mentioned we can read either.
Either one, yeah.
So like we have to do it. I mean, obviously before the exam, but you are going to give us like read from this page to the other, or we just read it on our own.
I mean, you've got in the syllabus, you've got each week chapters from each one.
Okay.
So you've got what to read for each week.
Okay.
But yeah, essentially they both cover the same thing, but differently. So it's perfect. Each one is perfectly fine. But if you read both of them, they're not the same. So yeah.
And if they're not the same,
It's-
why we can read?
Because
one,
they cover the same material, but
With a different perspective.
in a different way. Yeah.
Okay, and which
Yeah.
one do you prefer?
It depends. This one has more details. This one is easier to read.
Okay. Okay,
So,
interesting.
it's-
So I'll try with the first one, and if I understand something, then I'll go with this one.
Exactly.
Okay,
So yeah,
got it.
I think
Thank
those. Yeah.
That's the way. Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah.
So you said in the exam we have to cover 3 out of 5 questions.
Yeah.
Does that mean we only have to answer 3 of them, or do we have to answer all 5 and just 3 will be okay? Just
Yeah,
3.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Just answer 3.
Okay.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
Sure.
You're welcome. See you next week. Hello. Yeah, yep. Most welcome. Thank you.